speak with so many fellow bot enthusiasts. Some of you are experts in the combat robotics world, and some of you are just getting into the sport. You might have also just walked in and thought, wow, this seems like a really cool place to look around. One thing that we all have in common is visions of cool projects that we dream of tackling. Maybe you want to build the next super amazing Destructobot. Maybe you want to start a club in your community. Or maybe you see yourself starting a bot company. But who here has also struggled with achieving your goal because it seemed too daunting, too tedious, too confusing? I know I certainly have had these thoughts, but today I'm going to share with you my secrets for learning how to learn new skills. You're probably thinking, what in the world can a 13-year-old girl teach you about learning? Well, most of you are old. You probably haven't had to learn much in a while. I'm just kidding, but for real though, I helped get Turnabot off the ground, and I play a large role in our day-to-day operations. My family and I design and sell 150-gram sportsman combat robots, which are both non-destructive, which means that you can practice and play a lot and are a lot cheaper, and they're super competitive in full combat competition. To help get this group effort going, I created the logo, designed the website, created our instructional video, designed the graphics for our new arenas, and soldered components for our bot kits. All that to say, I've had to get up to speed on so many different skills, and I want to share with you how I've tackled it so that you can too. I've never really had to think much about my thought process and how I learned before now. It's kind of an automatic routine that I've built up over the years. But when I did break it down, I discovered that in whatever I'm learning, there are 4 main steps that I always take. The first step is envisioning your goal and having a good mindset going into the process. Whenever I decide to learn a new skill, I'll start off thinking about the end result that I want to achieve. So whether it's a super cool new bot design or a video that you want to shoot, envision what you want to accomplish and think about how empowering it feels when you achieve your goal. When I decided to take on the adventure and challenge of creating a website for Turnabot, I had so many ideas for what I wanted it to look like. It wasn't always a very concrete idea, but I knew the general color scheme and that I didn't want it to look too busy. The second step that I take is immerse myself into the world of whatever I'm learning. This usually comes in the form of looking up examples of what other people have done with the idea that I have. When I was designing Turnabot's logo, I looked up a bunch of logos from other businesses. Immersing myself into the world of logos helps me go back to step 1 and get a more elaborate vision of my goal. When you're looking into examples, you also need to find ways to learn how to do your skill, obviously. But you can find classes that teach you online or in person, you can look up tutorials on YouTube, or you can ask a friend who already knows how to do what you're trying to learn. It might also require going out on a limb and networking with people that you don't know yet, who are already knowledgeable in the subject. The great news is that this community of combat robot builders is very helpful, friendly, encouraging, and super excited about new participants. Time for step 3. After you've found learning tools and gotten inspired, making time to practice and implement what you've learned is super important. When you're first starting to learn a skill, it's a good idea to keep a consistent practice schedule. This can make it so you learn the basics really well before you move on to more technical steps. When I was learning how to use Adobe Illustrator, I made time for around 30 to 45-minute practice sessions 2 to 4 times a week. You don't always have to practice that often, but I really enjoyed learning Adobe, so liking what you're learning can help with motivation to practice. Once you have the basics down, you can move on to practice just in your free time. I started learning how to hand letter about 1.5 years ago, but I still work on it whenever I have time. Sometimes my family will watch a movie and eat dinner, and I'll work on doing repetitions while the show is playing. I do it absent-mindedly, so I can still focus on the movie while getting the practice in. Make sure to use all the knowledge that you learned from your chosen source or sources in your practice. It's important because if you don't practice well, then you won't perform as well as you could. When I learn, I also make sure not to jump from step to step too quickly. That can make doing more technical steps harder to understand because you didn't learn the beginning and in-between steps in enough detail. I know that there are a lot of times when you know that you don't have to practice for that long and do all the repetitions. But I also know that you have to put the work in to build those fundamental connections. If you skip all the repetitions that your course or teacher suggested, then you won't have the muscle memory of doing the same thing over and over again. It may seem a little tedious, time-consuming, and unnecessary, but I promise it will be worth it. Step 4 isn't really a step, but it is a necessary component. You can't quit a goal just because it gets hard. If it's too hard at the stage you're at, then you should probably back up and learn some of the easier steps in more depth. I've struggled with quitting what I'm learning. Sometimes it's just so hard to keep the skill going. But if you feel confident that you already have the basics down, and you're still getting frustrated, then you should take a step back and look at your situation from a different angle. This happened to me when I was making the Turnabot website. By the way, it's turnabot.com if you want to check that out. Anyway, I was having a really hard time making the website take shape. All of the individual features were working, like the links, the buttons, and the menu. But it just didn't look like I wanted it to. I did some research and found a front-end website editing software. That let me see what the website looks like to people visiting it, and I could then edit it from there. The software helped a ton and made it so I can make the website look just how I was envisioning. So if what you're learning and practicing feels unnecessarily difficult, then take a step back, do some research, and see if you can find any ways to think smarter, not harder. Now that you know how to envision your goal, immerse yourself into the world of what you're learning, make time to practice and take incremental steps, and how not to quit, we can move on to some tips to make learning your skill easier, more efficient, and hopefully a little quicker. These tips are what I call the ASP Cubed Tips for Learning. A cubed stands for Always Ask for Advice, which is super important if you want to achieve your goal to the absolute highest standard that you can. I am a very stubborn and competitive person, which can really help in what I'm learning and how to do something, because it means that I always want to get a skill as good as I possibly can. When I was learning how to water ski, my brother and I were doing it at the same time. On the first run of the day, I got out into the water and they started pulling me up. The very scientifically interested person that I am was thinking the entire time about center of gravity, drag, velocity, and hydrodynamics. Even with all the math to back me up, I was still crashing right after I got out of the water every time. After each failed attempt, the first thing I did when the boat circled back to me was ask my parents, who have been water skiing for a long time, what I can improve upon. They gave me tons of tips, and we analyzed the videos that my mom took. My brother and I went out next, and he managed to get up and ski a good distance on his first try. I took that as a challenge, and the next time I went out, the math worked in my favor. All that to say, one of the main reasons that I improved was because I always asked my parents for what I was doing wrong and what tips they had to help me improve. When you're asking for advice, you also can't feel bad or discouraged when you get critiqued. All of the suggestions will make you stronger at whatever skill you're learning. The next ASP Cubed tip is to supply strong and sufficient motivation. If you aren't motivated to reach your skill, then you definitely won't keep it up. You can end up quitting, and quitting for the wrong reason is never good. If you find you've stalled, it's helpful to sign up for an event where you'll want to perform well, like a competition, a race, or a fair. When I was learning how to speak ASL, American Sign Language, I knew that I wanted to be able to have a whole conversation that wasn't audible to someone. And I looked up a bunch of sign language videos, and I practiced twice a week. But then I ran out of steam. I didn't have a reason to keep practicing and learning. None of my friends knew ASL. There weren't any deaf events that I had signed up for because of COVID, so I stopped. Looking back, I wish that I had kept that skill up. It would have been so cool to be able to speak silently, but I didn't have sufficient motivation. So take this and learn from my mistakes and find a motivating event to keep you focused. The P cubed stands for Perfect Practice Makes Perfect, which means that if you practice incorrectly, then you'll learn the wrong way to do something. When you're practicing a skill, make sure that you practice as well and as correctly as you can, because that means that you will build good muscle memory. If you practice something wrong or half-heartedly, you won't be able to perform your best when it really counts. So building good habits is much easier than breaking bad habits. Because when you've learned something wrong, you have to take the time to unlearn it and then relearn it the correct way. It will take twice as long, so make sure not just to practice, but remember that perfect practice makes perfect. So what is your next great learning adventure? Maybe your goal is to design your own unique bot. Some of the steps might be 3D modeling, possibly with Tinkercad or Fusion 360. Soldering, there are great YouTube tutorials. It may be 3D printing. Break it down into small chunks that are manageable. You might instead want to start a club at your local school or in your community. It would be helpful to know about grants, local competitions, and makerspaces. These are all great skills to pick up, and you can use my learning tools and tips to achieve them. You also need to know all 4 steps to accomplish goals. Number 1, envision your goal. Number 2, immerse yourself into the world of what you're learning. Number 3, make time to practice and implement what you have learned. And of course, number 4, don't quit. Find something to keep you motivated. Also, keep in mind my ASP cubed tips for learning. A cubed, always ask for advice. S cubed, supply strong and sufficient motivation. And P cubed, perfect practice makes perfect. If you can take these tools and implement them into your learning routine, then you will find that learning won't feel like a chore. It will be a way of life. Thank you. So do you guys have any questions about, or for me, do you have any questions for anybody else up here? Questions? Do you have questions about Turnabot? Yes. The whole family. Yes. Yeah. So I do more of the design side. So I design the graphics. I designed the website. I did all of that. But my dad designed all of the actual bots. And he does a lot more of the engineering side of things, I guess.
We do try to keep all of them involved in whatever way they can. So their skills are improving. They're starting to help with wiring harnesses. Charlie's actually started soldering some of the Malenkis. Caroline has helped with all kinds of organizational stuff, and she has great ideas. So we really try and discuss it and have it as a family business, so they all understand what's going on. How do we register it? How do we control inventory? So we keep them as involved as we can. I think that's the plan. We really just kicked this off, and with COVID, everything was very remote. We have supported several grants going into schools to start school clubs, and we're supporting several camps where they're getting big kits. We are planning on starting something. We're from Atlanta, so we're planning on starting a series of tournaments in Atlanta, which could also include build events and things like that. So we haven't yet, but we're at the very beginning of it.
Try and do something like graphic designing or bot building, it takes time to get good at it. When I started playing around with the bots, I was not a good driver. It was hard for me to turn around in a good circle or go in a straight line. But after I've practiced a lot, I've now gotten better. And it takes time to learn to understand things. So you have to work on it a bit. Do you have any questions?
But one of the good things about having a family business is you're not as serious as you are if you're working together. So when we're in the workshop just doing our own jobs, we like to do things where we talk and we put on music and we all have fun and laugh while we're working.
Thank you very much, Turnabot. They are a supplier of mine. I buy a lot of my kit supplies from them. So I'm pretty sure I'm one of their biggest buyers over the last 6 months. Bought a lot of kits for our stuff. We've sold about 100 kits over the last 6 months. So they've been a little busy putting stuff together for me. So thank you them for joining us. And we're ready to do some more BattleBots in the battle box.